License to Kill is a spy film and stars Timothy Dalton in his final outing as James Bond. For the longest time, this film was the most hated of the Bond films, mainly because of its tone, gory violence, dark themes, and for somewhat being an unpleasant film to watch. But over time, opinion on the film has changed, and personally, I always liked the film. And having revisited the film for the purpose of this review, this has become one of my favorites of the Bond movies, and one I would put within my top 5. So in regards to this film being darker, I think it works to this film's benefit, as it makes it feel more real and stands out from the rest of the Bond movies. So what I'm going to do now is do a step-by-step of the stuff I liked. The opening feels very much like a classic Bond adventure, and it also gradually introduces some of the darker elements which will take over the film the more it goes on. It's also in this opening where we meet the main villain played by Robert Davi, who I think is one of the best Bond villains in the entire series, and one of the few villains who's able to personally get to Bond. It's also in this opening when we meet the villain's henchman played by a then unknown Benicio del Toro, who would later go on to become a great actor and an Oscar winner. Later on, in a pretty grisly scene, the villain has Bond's close friend Felix Leiter fed to a shark where he loses his leg and kills his wife, and when Bond discovers Felix and his wife, this drives Bond down a path of revenge. I also have to say that the performance from Dalton in this film is the best performance I've seen from a Bond actor up to that point, as Dalton's version of Bond is more emotional and aggressive, as his friend was nearly killed, and it also shows him as vulnerable, because later on, Bond becomes a rogue agent from his organization, and he is on his own with very little assistance, except from the main Bond girl and Q. I also like how while Bond is still seeking revenge, he infiltrates the villain's organization and undermines him by making him turn on his own associates, and later on destroying his drug laboratory. The main Bond girl, played by Carey Lowell, is another factor of this movie that is overlooked, as I think she's one of the better Bond girls, more so than the one from the previous film, as she is shown to be Bond's equal as they are both looking to bring down the villain and his operation. This film was also the final Bond film to be directed by John Glenn, and he goes all out to give what I think is his best film. The film at a lot of points slows down and actually takes its time to tell the story and to develop the characters, which I think in this film's case works, as the performances were both great and compelling enough that we didn't need an action scene every 10 minutes to keep the viewers engaged. And quite honestly, I preferred it when there weren't any action scenes, as the scenes where characters talked to each other were well written, and the scenes themselves contained a level of tension that kept me on edge and invested, especially when Bond interacted with the villain. But that does not mean that I did not like these action scenes, because on the contrary, these are some of the best action scenes in any of the 007 movies. And while some of these do contain a few dumb moments, these were still well shot, edited, and framed. The truck chase at the end of the film was one of the highlights for me. Overall, this film has slowly risen to being one of my favorite James Bond movies. And while it does contain the same issues from the previous films, like the cliche writing, a few dumb bits here and there, and a few characters who weren't written well, those problems are small compared to the stuff they got right this time. This is the first film that showed that James Bond isn't just a one-dimensional character, as he had a range of emotions, such as aggression, that Timothy Dalton was able to portray. The writing was a lot better and more interesting, some of the characters were more fleshed out, the story I was engaged with from the start right to the end, the action scenes are some of the best in the entire series, and the main villain is the first bad guy I have enjoyed watching since Goldfinger. So if you haven't seen this film, I would recommend checking it out, as it doesn't deserve to fly under the radar in regards to great Bond movies. And I'm gonna give License to Kill a 9 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, be sure to like my Facebook page, follow me on Twitter, and subscribe to my channel below. As always, I'm NETX5. Thank you for watching.